50 kilometers north of Paris, a Stone Age tomb held more than 300 dead. For years, it looked like one long story, one community building a megalithic grave, returning to it generation after generation. Then researchers drilled into the teeth. They pulled out ancient DNA from 132 people, and the tomb split in two. The people buried before the break were not the same people buried after it. Around 5,000 years ago, one population disappears from the genetic record of this place, and another arrives. The tomb did not just preserve bones, it preserved the moment one Stone Age world ended and another began. The site is called Bury, in the Paris Basin. It was not a pyramid or a palace. It was an allée sépulcrale, a long gallery grave built with stone slabs and dry stone walls, a kind of communal tomb used by Neolithic farming communities. Inside were the remains of an estimated 316 people, not a king alone in a chamber, not a battlefield. A community grave used across time, with bodies placed and disturbed, and returned to as the living came back to the same place. That is why Bury matters. A single skeleton can tell a life story. A large tomb can tell a population story. If the same families kept using this grave, the DNA should show continuity. Parents, children, cousins, descendants. The slow blur of one community through time. But Bury did not show a slow blur. It showed a fracture. Archaeologists already knew the tomb had two main burial phases. The first belonged to the late 4th millennium BC, ending around 3000 BC. Then came a gap, a period with no burial activity. After that, the tomb was used again during the 3rd millennium BC. A gap in a grave can mean many things. Maybe people changed rituals. Maybe they moved away for a while. Maybe the same community came back after a difficult century. The DNA made the gap more serious. In the new study published in Nature, Ecology and Evolution, researchers compared ancient genomes from 132 individuals at Bury. They found that the people on one side of the break and the people on the other side were genetically distinct. This was not simply one family forgetting a tomb and then remembering it. It looked like population turnover. The break at Bury fits into a much larger mystery known as the Neolithic decline. Across parts of northwestern Europe, after the first farming boom, signs of human activity drop sharply between roughly 3100 and 2900 BC. Settlements thin out. Monument building slows or stops in some regions. Pollen records show forest returning, which usually means fields and grazing land were abandoned. In other words, the landscape begins to look less worked by people. For decades, archaeologists have argued over why. Climate stress, soil exhaustion, social conflict, disease, migration. None of these explanations is enough by itself everywhere. The decline was probably not one disaster with one cause. But Bury gives the argument something unusually concrete. A tomb with people before the decline and people after it. A place where the abstract phrase population collapse can be read in teeth and bone. The early people at Bury belonged to diverse Neolithic farmer groups already present in the region. After the break, the later people carried ancestry linked more strongly to southern France and Iberia. That is the surprising part. The famous Bell Beaker migrations and later steppe ancestry are still in the future. This shift at Bury appears earlier. The study argues that ancestry from the south moved north into the Paris Basin around 2900 BC, after the local decline had already opened space. That does not mean a clean invasion scene, with one army replacing another overnight. Ancient DNA rarely gives us a movie. It gives us patterns in ancestry, sampled from the dead. But the pattern here is sharp enough to matter. The tomb's first users and its later users were not simply the same population continuing unchanged. Something broke the continuity. The study did not depend on DNA alone. The researchers combined genomics with radiocarbon dating, archaeology, strontium analysis, and palynology, the study of ancient pollen. Teeth are especially valuable because they preserve both identity and movement. The enamel can hold chemical clues about where a person grew up. The inner tooth can preserve fragments of human DNA, and sometimes traces of the microbes that infected a body before death. At Bury, the team also detected genetic evidence of infectious diseases in the ancient remains, including Yersinia pestis, the bacterium behind plague, and Borrelia recurrentis, which causes louse-borne relapsing fever. This is where the story becomes tempting to oversimplify. It would be easy to say plague killed the first population. The evidence does not let us say that. But it does show that disease was present in the same broad world where population decline was happening. The pollen evidence adds another layer. Between the burial phases, environmental data from the Paris Basin shows forest regeneration. Similar patterns are seen in other parts of northern Europe. Forest regrowth can sound peaceful, but in archaeology it can be a warning sign. Fields do not turn back into woods when a farming population is thriving. Grazing land does not rewild when herds are dense and villages are stable. When trees return, it can mean people have stopped clearing, planting, cutting, and grazing at the same scale. Human pressure has dropped. So the picture is not only genetic, it is demographic and environmental. The people change. The tomb pauses. The worked land grows quieter. Whatever happened around Bury, it left traces in bodies and in pollen. The word disappeared needs care. People do not vanish like smoke. Some die. Some leave. Some are absorbed into other groups. Some descendants may survive somewhere the study did not sample. What disappeared at Bury was continuity. The line from the tomb's first users to its later users was broken strongly enough that the later burials look like a different population structure. That is more interesting than a simple extinction story. It means the Neolithic world was not stable and timeless. Farming communities that had built monuments and buried their dead together could shrink, fragment, or be replaced by other farming communities before the Bronze Age transformations most people have heard about. The Stone Age was not one long, slow prelude. It had collapses of its own. Bury also speaks to a bigger archaeological puzzle: why megalithic building changed or stopped in parts of northwest Europe. For generations, these great stone tombs looked like the signature of a confident farming world. Communities gathered labor, moved stone, and built places for the dead that outlasted any one life. Then, in some regions, that tradition falters. The new study suggests one possible reason. If the communities that built and maintained these monuments were disrupted, reduced, or replaced, then the monuments did not simply go out of fashion. The social world that needed them may have changed. At Bury, the later use of the grave is different in ritual and population structure. The same stones remain, but the people returning to them are not the same kind of community as before. The tomb becomes a reused monument from an earlier world. Most popular ancient DNA stories about Europe jump straight to the steppe migrations, the spread of Bronze Age pastoralists, and the genetic transformations after about 2500 BC. That story is real, but it is not the whole story. Bury points to an earlier turnover among Neolithic farming populations themselves. The later group still belongs to the farming world, but with ancestry moving north from southern France and Iberia. That matters because it complicates the clean textbook sequence. First farmers, then steppe herders, then Bronze Age Europe. In reality, farmer Europe was already changing before the steppe arrived. The map was moving before the famous migration began. So, what can we say without turning evidence into myth? We can say that Bury preserves two burial phases separated by a hiatus. We can say that ancient DNA from 132 individuals shows a genetic discontinuity between those phases. We can say the later population carries ancestry linked to movement from the south. We can say the timing lines up with the wider Neolithic decline. We can also say that disease signals and forest regrowth appear in the same world. They are not proof of one neat cause, but they are part of the collapsed landscape. And we can say this: the people who first used the tomb did not simply continue there unchanged. When burial returned, the genetic story had changed. There is a reason ancient DNA stories travel so fast now. They do something older archaeology could rarely do. They make prehistory personal. A population decline is a line on a chart. A changing pottery style is a category in a museum. But DNA from teeth says this person belonged to one world, and this later person belonged to another. It lets us see history at the scale of the body. That can be powerful and dangerous. Powerful because it reveals movements and breaks no one could see from bones alone. Dangerous because modern people want simple ancestry stories, clean origins, clean replacements, clean endings. Ancient DNA almost never gives that. It gives fragments, probabilities, and patterns. Bury is not a nationalist origin myth. It is a warning against easy stories. Even 5,000 years ago, Europe was already a place of movement, collapse, and rebuilding. In the end, the most haunting thing about Bury is that the stone tomb survived the break better than the community did. The slabs remained, the chamber remained, the dead remained, but the people who came back to the grave after the hiatus carried a different ancestry, used the monument differently, and belonged to a changed world. That is what archaeology does at its best. It does not just find objects. It finds discontinuities. The places where memory looks smooth from far away, and then breaks when you get close enough. 50 kilometers north of Paris, a tomb kept its secret for 5,000 years. Then the teeth gave it up. The Stone Age people who built that world were not simply waiting to become us. Some of them were gone before history even learned how to write their names.